This is fun for me to be the apologist once in a while for religion because it's something to do with my life. If we'd listened to Aquinas, who said the divine...
For those who don't know, Peter is a reverend also, so, right?
Well,
pastor?
Reverend or irreverent?
I'm irreverent, but
Do we bow?
that's okay. She never gets it right. That's okay. Okay.
I'm an atheist, so.
Aquinas said that the divine is represented in the totality of creation. Mm-hmm. We didn't listen to that, but it was said by a pretty big name there. And I think, as Rod was saying, we are now looking at the church with an environmental ethic component, and that is developing and it's growing. I think that the criticism of the church is justified. I, too, criticize my own church. But at the same time, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bath, because for many it gives context for their lives. The church is one of the big systems. Another one is capitalism. How are we doing as a capitalistic country? And we're exporting capitalism around the world. Is that going to work? For me, it doesn't make any sense to be an apologist for capitalism when we have a finite planet and an economic system that only lives on no limits to growth. They don't reconcile. What do you think, panel?
I think we need to start exporting a whole new type of service that capitalism pretends to provide us. And we're all first of all, let's own up to the fact that we're all sitting at this table. We all got here today by plane or by car. Yeah. And we're all wearing nice clothes. We've all been well fed. We've got fresh water. I mean, everything about this is the quintessence of capitalism. So this is not about pointing fingers. Capitalism is a big word, as you just used it. And the tragedy for me about capitalism is that it has bought into the same syndrome of domination of the natural world with a frenzy. There's no tomorrow when it comes to killing life.
No.
That is
Now, Peter,
very
I have
disturbing.
to Peter, sorry, Peter. Yeah. Michael, I just have to say that I believe that socialism could also bring fresh water and cars and things like that. And I think, Bob, I saw you shaking your head.
Well, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we could be in a socialist society and still drinking our fresh water. You know,
well,
so
I mean,
or capitalism.
You don't want to confuse capitalism and markets. Yeah. Markets properly regulated are something that clearly works better than anything else we've discovered, but they don't have to be capitalist. There have been markets going way, way, way back. It's a very efficient way of doing things most people want done. But capitalism is bought into the perpetual growth. For instance, unfortunately, nobody's really still yet looked closely at what a steady state economy would look like. And
say that again, Paul. A steady state,
a non-growing economy. You got to remember, for most of the history of human beings, we have had a non-growing economy. Yeah.
Actually, if you look at economic theory, almost all of it is steady state. Yeah. They are not. The theory isn't growth focused. Yeah. It's the practice of it that has become growth manic.
Right.
My understanding is that capitalism is based on growing because success is when you make more money and you sell more things and it's self-perpetuating.
I'm distinguishing economic theory from the practice of capitalism, which is, for many, many different reasons, committed to a growth ethic.
So do we need to not have a capitalist society if we're going to save the planet?
We need to get rid of the growth ethic.
I look at growth. When we were talking about religion, I kept thinking, what's religion? And religion doesn't have to take place in churches. Religion, communism is a kind of religion, fascism is a religion, capitalism is a religion. What really distinguishes a religion from other systems of being and thinking is that it disempowers the individual, takes away the individual's capacity to make independent judgments, and requires the individual listen to and believe the dogma. Mm-hmm. And to me, all of those systems are inevitably going to lead to the destruction of the life-supporting capacity of the planet. That's what religions do. They disempower the individual. And that's what capitalism does.
Are you saying that a solution is to get rid of capitalism? Like, what kind of system would you put in place instead of capitalism if capitalism is destroying the world.
What I think is a system of markets in which in which you have a democratic system where the power shifts around to the degree that everybody basically, first of all, is much better informed than they are now, is making individual decisions, and where you don't have this incredible concentration of power.
And where people use self-correcting modes of thinking, as in science, where one of the things we keep doing in science is trying to convince everybody else that they're wrong, our fellow scientists. We love to critique each other. And that's how you succeed in science, by disproving your own ideas and improving them. You never prove something. You can't prove global warming is correct. And in the case of climate science, the enormous efforts of thousands of climate scientists around the world have led to what we call a scientific consensus, which means agreement among the experts that global warming is occurring and that it's the result largely of human activity, the burning of fossil fuels, the cutting down of forests, and the evidence for this is just overwhelming. And there you can show that no other explanation has ever been put forth that's consistent with the observations we now see around the planet. And global warming science, this consensus science, does explain the phenomena we see. And that's as good as it gets in science.
The point is that scientists are perpetually looking. You know, if for instance, I'm an evolutionist. Right. If I could show that Darwin was wrong on natural selection, I'd send the article off to Science tomorrow. In other words, that would make me the most famous scientist on the planet if I could show that Darwin had been wrong in his fundamental approach to natural selection.
If evidence came along that burning fossil fuels and loading the atmosphere with carbon dioxide wasn't going to warm the planet, there would be a mass of papers. I would publish it. I'd love it if that were the case. But decades of work by thousands of scientists have established beyond any reasonable doubt that global warming is real. Now, what's happening is that an anti-science movement in this country has grown in the last decade. We're going to see the symptoms of it in the coming up Congress, with members of Congress flat out saying that they're not going to take science seriously.
But this is
and
not
you can't run
John.
a modern country.
But this was actually funded by right-wing thoughtless tanks. The same people who did
acid rain, tobacco,
smoking, side stream smoking. It's exactly the same individuals.
And here's what's
business. It's not politics. It's business as politics.
Why is the money in being a climate denier?
Look,
why is it there?
If you listen to our best economists, our engineers, solving global warming would actually make the average person in the United States richer.
Yep.
We would be wealthier, happier, freer of illness, but we're not doing it because a small number of people will lose their vested interests.
You've also got folks up in Greenland
involved in oil, in coal. They either have to retool and start building wind turbines and solar panels, or they're going to lose out. And so because they have huge amounts of money and huge political influence, thanks to the Supreme Court, they now are calling the shots.
And our politicians also are talking about it's a recession, we can't afford to make the changes. And Rod, as a historian and an ecologist, can you talk about other times in history this might have happened where actually maybe the good won out? And that
I like to look at the half full side and see where there have been some important reforms. One of them that was a reform of capitalism. The way capitalism worked, it might be very relevant to what we're talking about around the table, is the abolition of slavery in this country. And you look here at ethics trumping economics. We had 4 million slaves. People had paid money for those slaves. So look at that as one of the biggest takings in American history. The ethical question came down to say, as Harriet Beecher Stowe put it in 1859, slavery is wrong. Interesting to me that a woman would step up as an ethical leader there, much like Ingrid has, Frances Moore LePay, Rachel Carson, maybe we need to listen a little more to women in terms of ethical revolutions. But look at slavery, look at abolitionism. Look at William Lloyd Garrison. In the 1830s, started a paper called The Liberator. He had no subscribers.
So what's the equivalent of the Civil War?
What needs to happen
the
today?
sad thing is the animals can't get up and fight for themselves. The oceans can't fight for themselves.
Well, one of the things we need
us,
is more involvement, not only of social scientists, but of humanitarians. In fact, I'm interested because you used the example I use. People were trying to organize this millennium assessment of human behavior to get at these ethical issues, which are so little discussed in our society. And they say, well, what the hell can the humanities contribute? And I always report that when Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, he said, so you're the little woman that started this big war.
Yes, he did.
And we've got to get the narratives right. We've got to change the basic norms of the society.
It's not only women. As a woman, let me say, that's all very nice, but it's not only women. I mean, look at the little man who started throwing the British out of India.
Oh, I didn't mean it was only women.
No, and Lord Mountbatten said to him, you know, oh, this is the little man who ruined the empire for us.
Yeah. Well, sometimes revolutions can take place
by
sometimes revolutions are violent, sometimes revolutions are not. We all, the older ones of us around the table, passed through a civil rights period, which things were awfully bad in the 1950s, as Paul had occasion to write recently. And we changed our minds about that. We're changing our minds about gay and lesbians right now before our eyes. We've changed our minds about women in the last 80 years. We've changed our minds about Native Americans. There's been from the Jeffersonian definition of natural rights as life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all men are created equal. We've expanded that definition of man. It may be time to expand that definition still further to nature, from natural rights to the rights of nature. I see this as a good old American tradition, could be dusted off, could trump economics, could be used.
I know, it's exactly what we're trying to do. And I've said many times, we're going in the right direction. The problem is the time problem.
Yes.
In other words, if we had another 1,000 years, I would expect that the world would be very much like we would like to see. The question is, how the hell do we get it done in the next couple of years?
I think it's like the joke, the pilot who says, folks, the good news is we're ahead of schedule, the bad news is we're lost. I like the fact that when you talk about these revolutions, I mean, John Muir got a hold of Teddy Roosevelt and spent a few days with him and converted him to a religion that Yosemite was a cathedral. That's a breakthrough for me. And when you get the U.S. Fish and Wildlife going, with Teddy Roosevelt having converted from being a big game hunter to protecting wildlife and the rewilding of nature movement.
Anyone can change.
This is unbelievable. That's right. Anybody can make a change.
But I do think that we have to beware of not thinking of nature as trees and streams and wonderful mountains and so on that we can benefit from seeing or having our grandchildren see. We have to remember, when we even call Alaska pristine before oil drilling, that there were millions, billions of animal lives living in that environment, and that they didn't destroy it, we did, and have to have some awe for the individuals, not in their utility to us, but just in the fact that they are flesh and blood, that they have emotions as we do, that if you burn them with a cigarette, they have pain.
That's an ethical decision that we happen to agree with.
And John Muir
but many people don't. That's the problem.
John Muir refused to use the word resource. He said
nature's rights, and it should also be animal rights.
I don't like services. I don't like services.
That's
like saying I value my wife because of all the services she gives me.
But Muir said we got to get rid of the word resource because we're going to look at every tree and call it a resource.
And okay, so what do we say in its place? Because I know you told me it's a tree, and so
living is a good thing. It doesn't apply to everything.
It's part of a community to which we belong. You know, the ecologists taught us to think of community in broader terms. We say the community of Santa Monica. We talk about a community in terms of people. It's time we looked, as you're reminding us and others, at the broader ecological community. And we see ourselves as a member of it. The important point about ethics is that I think it can grow. I think sometimes it can grow very quickly, Paul.
I agree.
You know, and we've seen that.
I think the civil rights movement was a good example. In historical terms, it was almost instantaneous.
The evolution in slavery, from Garrison's Liberator in 1830 to him closing his press and saying, done, out for lunch, business over, slaves are freed. Now, there was still a long way to go, granted, but that was a huge change in capitalism. Let's come back to that basic point.